You find me opposite the butcher's here. Now, this is a clue as to what our subject is. Not actual butchery, but one thing, and it's linked with the bakers. There used to be a baker's here at the bakehouse. Firmins and Sons used to be a bakers and confectioners. Not necessarily with this specific baker, but with bakers in general. There's a link between the butchers and the baker, and you've probably guessed it from the title on the thumbnail. It's the Sunday roast, and it's quite an interesting history, which is why I'm doing it. But I'm going to hand you over to that one person, voiceover Dave, and he is going to give his take on it. The human concept of time is frankly alarming. It is a linear construct that runs forward, utterly indifferent to the quality of the wallpaper or whether you remembered to defrost the peas. But every now and again, humanity manages to halt this relentless march for one specific, starchy and vitally important purpose: the Sunday roast. The Sunday roast is not merely a meal. It is a profound declaration that an entire nation has collectively decided that the last day of the week, the day earmarked for contemplation and rest, should instead be dedicated to the consumption of an almost paralyzing quantity of slow-cooked meat and root vegetables. This practice began, as all great human achievements do, with utter inefficiency. Rewind, if you dare, to medieval England, a time before central heating, before penicillin, and crucially before anyone had invented a reliable mechanism for heating up food that didn't involve setting fire to most of your surroundings. The average English yeoman, or perhaps their slightly less ambitious neighbour, the English yeowoman, faced a weekly dilemma. How does one prepare an enormous celebratory meal without devoting the Lord's Day, that is, Sunday, to strenuous labour? The answer, discovered by accident naturally, was the oven. On Sundays, the cookery staff were often granted time off, a concept they found utterly bewildering, leaving the kitchen fires banked up and still hot. The brilliant, staggering simplicity of the solution was to put the week's meat in the oven on the way to church and return 2 hours later to a perfectly cooked meal. Sorry to interrupt, voiceover Dave, but at this point I just want to say something about there were people in medieval times that didn't have ovens, and the Sunday roast being put in the oven before going to church, a lot of people didn't actually have ovens, and you couldn't really spit roast the meat because you have to tend the meat all the time while it's cooking. So the idea of putting it in an oven is that you can shove it in there and you can just leave it for a couple of hours. And this is what they used to do. The poorer people who didn't have ovens used to use the bakers who didn't bake bread on a Sunday. And it was a bit like the communal ovens. It's the French that started communal ovens up for the community who couldn't afford to have a proper oven. So the Sunday roast really was a community event after church. There's one thing you've missed, which is the Yorkshire pudding. Tell us about the Yorkshire pudding. You can't have Sunday roast without Yorkshire pudding. Dave, tell us about that. Thank you, Mr. Ponderer. I was just getting there. This Sunday roast method was particularly popular in Yorkshire, where pragmatism is a religion, a small quiet religion involving mostly sensible coats. They realised that while the meat was occupying the expensive real estate of the oven's base, the space underneath was going utterly unused. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Yorkshire pudding exists. Contrary to romantic legend, the Yorkshire pudding was not invented for flavour. It was invented to absorb the highly valuable and utterly non-negotiable meat drippings, known today as gravy, and to prevent it from soaking into the floorboards. It also served a crucial economic purpose. Historically, the Yorkshire pudding was served first, often overflowing the plate, in the desperate hope that diners would fill up on the cheap flour-based batter and thus consume less of the expensive actual meat. This is the only documented instance of blatant financial manipulation being widely accepted as a cultural delicacy. The Victorians, with their obsession with standardising everything from drain pipes to minor social awkwardness, codified the roast. They added potatoes, often roasted with the same alarming efficiency as the meat, and introduced vegetables, primarily because someone, probably a particularly earnest duke, correctly surmised that greens were visually appealing, although utterly pointless in terms of flavour delivery. By 1850, the template was complete: meat, potatoes, pudding, gravy, and a small lingering sense of obligation. It's amazing, Sunday roasts. But it wasn't just beef. It was all sorts of meat, from pork, likely rabbits, whatever the poorer folk could afford, they had. And it was always a week's worth of meat that was cooked in these ovens. I remember my mother, we used to have a Sunday roast, and then we never ate the whole thing. It was carved for Sunday roast, and then on the Monday morning we had cold slices of meat for dinner with potato, and then the rest of the meat was used for different things. It might be put in a pie, or they used to make a cottage pie with some of the meat. the lamb shepherd's pie. It used to last the week. That was the point of the roast. Because in those days, well, not in my mum's day, but back in the early days, they didn't have fridges. And cooking the meat was one way of getting it to last longer in time. Anyway, that's an interesting subject. And if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in another video. Stay safe.